Right now we're going to go to line one and speak to Mr. Roger Grimes. Good day, sir.
Good afternoon, Pete.
Good to have you on the program again. What's on the go?
Well, actually, I just got back from a little rest vacation because I think the last time we were chatting, I had just gotten out of the hospital after heart surgery.
Yeah.
And I was saying that, I was only in the hospital 3 or 4 days, and I came out to a very sort of bizarre political situation, which was what was going on in the progressive conservative leadership at the time with, this Mr. Bennett was supporting an NDP candidate. Bill Barry was saying the fix was in and all. And, I go away for a couple of weeks and I come back and there's a few more bizarre things going on.
Stop going away.
Yeah. I wanted to comment, if I could, about two things briefly. One is the what's going on with the office staffing in the Premier's office, because I do know something about that from past experience. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is the CAMI project in Labrador, and the so-called benefits agreement, and I think you mentioned it in your introduction to the show today about what happened to the no more giveaways and secondary processing and so on.
Yeah.
So both those items I'd like to address briefly if I could.
By all means, I look forward to your perspective on it.
Yeah, the first, let me deal with the project in Labrador, because remember now the big mantra for the Conservatives was that, Voisey's Bay was supposed to be a huge giveaway and that they would have no more giveaways. My take on it, Pete, is that what we saw with this benefits agreement and the talk about the CAMI project, the new mining project in Labrador, is really, it's not a benefits agreement at all. What we're seeing is a complete change and about face by the government, and we have in fact their second major giveaway now being confirmed, because I still rate the Muskrat Falls project as a huge giveaway, where we as the ratepayers in the province with Muskrat Falls have to pay the total cost of that project on our light bills for the next 50 years, while Nova Scotia gets free power, 20% of it for 35 years. They get 75% subsidized power forever. With the rest of it, it's going to be given to them to be sold for like 3 or 4 or 5 cents, whatever the market bears, when it's going to cost us as the ratepayers in Newfoundland 20 cents on our light bills to produce it. And here what we have is, never mind any secondary processing with this so-called great iron ore project in Labrador. Not only, is there no great project, there is no mention that they should have a smelter or a refiner or even a pellet plant like they do in the Iron Ore Company of Canada and Wabash Mines. They're just going to take the ore, have a concentrate, and ship it directly out as quickly as they can to maximize the profit for the companies. And the government, the current government, has forgotten all about, the real jobs which are in a processing plant like what is happening out in Long Harbour. And not only that, Pete, but the further part of the giveaway is we are going to pay, the ratepayers here on the island and or in Labrador are also going to pay for the power line that we've committed to build from Muskrat Falls back to Lab West, because the current companies up there, IOC and Wabush, get very cheap electricity from the Upper Churchill, and so they should, because they even gave up their own power plant so that could be developed, and they're getting the cheapest energy in North America, because that's what the Upper Churchill project provides, whereas the CAMI project is going to get subsidized energy again, much less than the cost to develop it. They're going to pay for it, and we are going to pay the difference again on our light bills. So another huge big giveaway, and I don't know, how they can have the face to brag about a benefits agreement when in fact what we have is no attempt. So maybe it's not such a great project after all. So
well, I'm just wondering,
why don't they tell us whether it's big enough or not to support any kind of secondary processing, even pellets,
Yeah.
Even put it in a pellet instead of just sending out the concentrate, because the whole deal about Voisey's Bay was, no, concentrate wasn't good enough. We have a finished product, a finished nickel product going to leave Newfoundland and Labrador, and that was the mantra that, if we're going to have mining prospects in the future, that's what it should be. So they've either got to admit that this CAMI project is no big deal, it's not big enough for anything, we shouldn't be bragging about it, it's just another small project, or if it's the big deal that they say it is, where is the demand, where did it go for us to have some secondary processing for long-term benefits instead of the few jobs that we're going to get anyway?
Yeah, I mean, you would think that in lieu of all of the benefits that come with secondary processing, they would have to offer a considerable amount amount, and whether or not that's represented in what has been described in the last couple of days, whether that's sufficient or not, I don't know. But one would assume that if they're not going to give on one end, then they're going to make it worth our while on the other.
No doubt. And, I don't see it. I'm just so really disappointed in it because no one in this government has even raised the prospect or explained why it is that there has been no call. There's never been any demand from this government for this project and the proposal with Alderon, of which Mr. Williams, the former premier, is still tied into the company in a significant conflict as I see it. So you still have that circumstance where there's been no explanation from this government as to why there has been no call for secondary processing related to this project. And it's a big giveaway, a big disappointment, and a big step backwards, not something to brag about.
Okay,
so the second one, Pete, if I could, about
I was going to say, we know how you feel about that one. Let's go on to the office staffing situation.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about that as well. I'd use words as strong as this. I believe that Tom Marshall should be embarrassed and ashamed to be part of what's happening up there. I believe that they are, let me use this phrase, I believe they are perpetrating a fraud on the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and in this sense, I believe they are moving campaign expenses from Mr. Coleman to the taxpayers of the province in a very slick scam move. Because what they've done, because, if Mr. Marshall wanted to change his office, he should have done it, his staff, he should have done it 2 months ago when he went in there. So he admits he's doing it for Mr. Coleman. So what is Mr. Coleman running out of money for his campaign staff? He's now moving his chief organizer, whom I'm assuming he was paying, into the Premier's office so that Roger Grimes and Pete Soucy and the rest of the taxpayers who are listening can pay for it instead of Mr. Coleman. And he's going to have full access to the government. And now who's his loyalty to? Is it to Tom Marshall? Obviously not. Tom Marshall has said he's doing it because this person is going to stay there and be chief of staff for Frank Coleman. So what should really happen, now they're admitting, I guess, that Frank Coleman is really the Premier. So why don't they forget about this little bit of nonsense they're saying about he can't be the Premier until they swear him in at their own convention in July. He is already the Premier. Tom Marshall is admitting he's the Premier. He's taking direct instruction from him. He's hiring his staff at his instruction. And so who's going in there next? Is it going to be, are we going to see Carmel Turpin hired now? She is the spokesperson that I hear in the press for Mr. Coleman when he doesn't speak himself. She's working for Mr. Coleman.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, but
Mr.
Marshall is actually saying that he's still in control and he's making the decisions and calling the shots, although one would have to assume that he's not going to be deciding anything without consultation and the consent of the Premier designate.
Understand, but now it's gone even further. Now he's absolutely coalescing in a scheme that says, not only will I talk to and take some advice from Mr. Coleman, who's the real Premier, by the way. Let's not kid ourselves. He is the real Premier today, and Tom Marshall should be ashamed of himself. He's a good friend of mine, but he should go home and admit that he's letting, really, Frank Coleman run the province without having to sit in the chair and be accountable for it. And now he's letting Frank Coleman foist and move some of his proper expenses that he should be incurring in the Progressive Conservative leadership campaign onto the taxpayers of the province. It's just not right. It's never been done before. It shouldn't be done now. If there's going to be a transition period, even when a government changes, when the government changed from Roger Grimes to Danny Williams, the transition period took about 10 days. And Roger Grimes was still the Premier on paper, but Roger Grimes didn't make any decisions because he knew that the people had chosen Danny Williams to be Premier. So I was officially the Premier in case some crisis came up, but I wouldn't have done anything without checking with Danny Williams, who was then elected to take my place. In this case, Tom Marshall knows that there's no other possible outcome that can happen other than Frank Coleman be the Premier. So why is he waiting? Why are they continuing on? And now why are they taking funds that should be paid by Mr. Coleman and or the PC party as part of their campaign, and having them spent by the taxpayers, because Roger Grimes is a taxpayer who doesn't want to have any of my taxes funding Frank Coleman's leadership campaign. And I'm sure there are lots others out there, including progressive conservatives, who don't want to see their tax dollars funding their party's campaign. It's to be done by the party and by the candidates themselves. It's a scam. They're perpetrating a fraud, and I'm really saddened by seeing Tom Marshall participate in it, because I have a lot of respect for Tom Marshall as a person, and I consider him a friend, but I lose respect for him when I see him participate in this kind of an arrangement.
Well, I certainly can't ask you to be any more specific or full force on either one of those subjects. I did want to ask you if you had anything to offer on the Humber Valley paving situation, and whether or not, in your experience, anything even similar to that happened in years past. We're well past our time, but if you have any quick comments about that, we'd certainly be appreciative.
Only to say this, Pete, I don't recollect any such forgiveness for anybody in the 17 years that I was involved in the government, with the administration led by Clyde Wells, an administration led by Brian Tobin, an administration led by 3 years by me personally. I don't ever recollect a circumstance where a company was allowed to walk away from its bonded commitments in this kind of a fashion, and certainly it would have been just as big a scandal, and people would leave people shaking their heads just like they are now, if it was done with someone who was so closely tied to the governing party as Mr. Coleman is. I mean, it's everyone that I speak to on the street says, sure, they can say what they like. You know, Mr. McGraw, the minister, seems to be making a complete fool of himself and is falling on the sword, you know, pretending in some way that he doesn't really know Mr. Coleman, or he didn't really know that Gene Coleman was his son, or that they had been connected, or that the change in the company directorship had only happened 2 or 3 days before. I mean, who do they expect to believe that kind of thing? You know, they have no credibility on the issue. Again, it's kind of shameful, but I think the public has already passed judgment on it, and now I know that the Auditor General is going to have a look at it to see if there's anything technically or legally that has been done wrong. But I can tell you this, the people of the province have already decided that there's something politically that has been done wrong, because it looks wrong. And there's an old expression that they used to use in politics, and probably still do, Pete. They say, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. There's a really good chance it's a duck. So this looks bad, smells bad, seems bad, is bad, and I think that's where the people of the province have already made up their minds. Okay, we're going to waddle off to our break now after all that. Thanks very much for your call. Thank you, Peter. Let's talk again soon. Sure, appreciate the time. Thanks a lot. Okay, all the best. Bye-bye. Well, no holds barred there. Mr. Roger Grimes, former Premier, of course, and he had quite a bit to say on a few things there.